Good evening, everybody. If you want to come in and get a seat, we want to start as soon as we possibly can. Welcome to our opportunity to hear from Uri tonight, let you know a little bit about how we arrived here. And 2014 was the first time that a group of us from Sunnybrook had an opportunity to go over and to visit the Holy Land. And it was everything we expected and more. We were truly blessed by that. It was on that trip that myself and a number of us became introduced to this less young now than was young then man. And since that time, Uri has kind of been an exclusive guide for the tours that we take every other year to Israel. And he also came in 2019 and spoke to us about everything from the kind of what it's like to live in the Holy Land, to some biblical geography, those kinds of things that would try to help us understand what the biblical world is like by looking at the world today, and then spoke a little bit about how things in the Middle East are. I know that's something that we're always curious about. Raise your hand if you're curious about what's going on in the Middle East. Yeah. And that's not a new thing for you, right? That's not a new thing for you. I've been fascinated by it for almost my entire life. So when the recent events of October 7th, the tragic events of October 7th happened, obviously I was in connection with my good friend Uri, and we were talking, and he mentioned he would be coming over, and he'd been visiting some places in Vancouver. He'd been on a tour here in the Midwest. Arrived in Oklahoma recently, and was actually speaking yesterday in Ardmore. Is here. I will take him to the airport at 5 in the morning if anybody else wants to drive him. Anybody else want to drive Uri and spend an hour talking with him? I bet you I could get a number of you want to do that. Yeah, exactly. But we really wanted to hear from him in terms of just to give us a perspective. I think it is important for us to not only have ideas and opinions, but to literally say, no, I want to learn. I want to learn more about it. Uri does not pretend to be the final word on anything, but I do appreciate his friendship. I do appreciate his desire to help us as a church to know that part of the world. And so I've been very, very grateful for that. I've also been very grateful for his attitude and his deep care. Not only for the nation of Israel, but also for a number of other humanitarian type issues and factors that are definitely a part of how he lives and how he desires to honor God with that in his own life. So I'm glad to have him here. He's going to speak for about 40 minutes. And then I'm going to come up and maybe ask a few questions to try to make sure that we're covering a lot of the bases. I've already talked with a number of you, and you've said, well, I'd like to know more about this. And so if he doesn't cover it, I'm going to try to cover it with a few questions. And then at the very end, if we have some time, we don't know exactly how long this is going to go, but we're not going to go late at all. But probably right around 8 o'clock. If we feel like there are still some questions that we have, then we might have time for a few of those as well. So, without any further delay, Uri Goldflam.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Jim, for that wonderful introduction, and thank you once again, Sunnybrook, for this warm welcome. It feels like coming home. So I'm very, very grateful to see a lot of familiar faces. And I'm looking forward to welcoming you to my home on the next trip to Israel. Having said that, I need to tell you that I'm not happy to be here. Not happy to be here under these circumstances. The reason that I am here is because 4.5 weeks ago, for us, the world changed. Changed so dramatically that nothing that we assumed we knew, or the paradigms that we've held before October 7th are any longer relevant for the world after October 7th. And I'm here in order to bring to you the message that the world has not just changed for us. On my own personal level, my entire fall calendar has been erased. As you can imagine, nobody's flying in to Israel on any airline other than Al. Tourists are not coming anymore. So it became an imperative for me to come out here to share with you the story and try to mitigate some of those changes. But beyond that, to share the story of what's happening in Israel and to try to impart on you some of the changes on the local, the regional, the global, and even the civilizational level. I want to start by giving you a bit of a background and talk about the geography, because I know many of you have been with me to Israel. Many of you have been here 4 years ago when I gave a big lecture on the geography of the Holy Land. But I know that also some of you have not, and some of you may have forgotten. So I want to tell you a little bit about our region. The area which is called the Middle East is actually a misnomer. It's the Middle East only if you're British. For everybody else, it's kind of the center of the world. It's the connection between Africa, Asia, and Europe. To go anywhere, from anywhere in the ancient world, you have to come through this land. It's not a coincidence that this is where cultures cross paths, scents, flavors, swords, faiths are born, and things that occur here will then go out to the rest of the world and affect everybody. Israel is a very, very tiny part of this entire region. North Africa, Western Asia, Southern Europe, and Israel is a very, very small part of it. Just for a comparison, if you want to look at California, or better yet, look at Oklahoma, that's the size of Israel in comparison to the great state of Oklahoma. It's a very, very small country, under 10 million people. But that also is very important to understand in order to understand the magnitude of what occurred in Israel on October 7th. How do we get to this point? And again, very, very briefly, this is not a comprehensive history lesson. This does not cover all the angles and all the reasons and all the subtexts and all the small influences of different countries, but essentially, Israel was established in 1948 after the United Nations announced the partition plan. The return of the Jews to the land of Israel in the modern era, because Jews have been returning to their homeland for millennium, but in the modern era is called the Zionist movement, the political manifestation of the 2,000-year-old desire and yearning of the Jewish people to return to their homeland. And with a series of political, philosophical leadership pioneers, with a combination of anti-Semitism, pogroms, and the violence against Jews in Europe, they began flocking and moving back to the land of Israel under the Ottoman Empire, and the clashes that then ensued between Jews and Arabs through World War I, through World War II, led the British to give up their mandate. It was the British that managed the region after World War I, after the falling apart of the Ottoman Empire. It was the British who promised to establish a national homeland for the Jews. It was the British who also gave a similar promise to the Arabs to establish a kingdom in Palestine. And these two competing promises eventually led the British to give up and create and ask the United Nations now to create the partition plan. 3 areas designated for Jews and 3 areas designated for Arabs. The Jews accept the offer, the Arabs reject the offer. War breaks out, civil war that morphs into an all-out war once the British leave. And the invasion of the Egyptians from the south, the Transjordan from the east, Syria and Lebanon from the west, Iraq, Saudi Arabia, Yemen, other Arab countries that participated in this war. And the result is an Arab loss and a newborn state of Israel. The Arabs lost what was supposed to be the southern part of the new Arab state. Let's call it Palestine, although nobody used that name at that time. And this became the Gaza Strip under Egyptian control. They lost the mountain area to the Transjordan, to the Hashemite kingdom of Transjordan, changed its name from Transjordan to Jordan, River Jordan, with an east bank and the west bank. That's where the name comes from. Under Jordanian control for the next 19 years. And they lost the northern area to Israel, and all the Arabs living here, those who remained and did not escape or run away, became Israeli citizens. And so these are the borders of the state of Israel until 1967. In 1967, the war that is known as the 6 Days War, June 4, 1967, Israel triples in size. Right, a preemptive strike on the side of Israel pushes the Egyptians all the way out of the Sinai Peninsula across the Suez, pushes the Jordanians out of the mountain area across the River Jordan, pushes the Syrians away from the strategically elevated Golan Heights into the deeper area of the Syrian Golan, and these become all under Israeli control. These are the borders of Israel after 1967. There's another war in 1973. But the result of that is the peace agreement of 1979 with Egypt. The Sinai Peninsula is given back to Egypt with the exception of the Gaza Strip. The Egyptians did not accept the Israeli offer to take the Gaza Strip as well after taking the Sinai Peninsula. And so the Gaza Strip remains under Israeli control, as the West Bank and the Golan Heights. And this is a very, very short and abridged version of how the borders were created. And I'm moving a little bit fast forwarding with the timeline, because what will happen with the West Bank and the Gaza Strip are main questions that are also relevant to our discussion today. The population in the West Bank and the Gaza Strip are what we call the Palestinian population in the West Bank and Gaza. They have different ethnic backgrounds. Those are more Egyptian, those are more Jordanian. Many are local families and towns and villages that have been on the ground for hundreds of years. And the Israeli presence on the ground was something that was considered to be a foreign presence. And so the clash between the Palestinians and the Israelis soon ensued. I'm going to fast forward to 1993. In 1993, Israel signs the Oslo Accords, a mutually recognized agreement between this is Prime Minister Yitzhak Rabin, between Israel and the PLO, represented by Yasser Arafat. For the first time, the Israel and the PLO have a mutually recognized agreement. And Oslo then becomes the vehicle towards Palestinian statehood. Israel withdraws in 1995 from most of the territories of the major Palestinian population areas. The cities, the majority of the Palestinian population is urban. Bethlehem and Ramallah and Hebron, Gaza, Jericho, Ramallah, Shechem, Nablus, Jenin, all these city centers are evacuated from Israelis, from Israeli forces, and the Palestinian Authority is born in 1995, an institution which is similar to a government, which will now manage the affairs of the Palestinian population. The idea was very simple. Let's give territory, authority, and responsibility to this man who is considered the authentic representative of the Palestinian population, and they will build a state. And within 5 years, they will have enough to lose. They will have their own institutions. They will have their own security forces. They will have their own education system. They will have enough to lose that we'll be able to now talk about the big issues, the ones we're never able to talk about without ending with a big blowout. Settlements, borders, security, Jerusalem. That was the idea. But Oslo did not succeed because the result, there's a collage of pictures here which I can't show you because I can't leaf through these pictures right now. This is an exploded bus, if you remember. That's an exploded restaurant. If you remember the period of the bus bombs, suicide bombers, restaurants, cafes, things like that, starting in 2000. In October 2000, Yasser Arafat, Ehud Barak, Bill Clinton got together in Camp David. The final deal was placed on the table, where Yasser Arafat received almost 99% of the Palestinian demands. He rejected this demand because he was asked in return to end the hostilities. Israel would have nothing to trade with anymore. So this was supposed to be the end of the conflict. But Arafat walked away. And instead of coming back with a counteroffer, he began a wave of terrorism that Israelis had not known until then. It took 5 years, but within 5 years, we were able to limit those attacks, thwart most of them, and essentially bring this very bloody uprising to an end. You can see here on this graph, anybody want to guess what happened here? That suddenly there is a greater level of success in thwarting or stopping suicide bombs. So what happened here, we're talking about the end of 2002, the beginning of 2003, Israel sends troops back on the ground where we evacuated. Remember, in 1995, we pulled out. Now we went back in to take control of the ground. And we built a physical barrier around the West Bank. A physical barrier preventing would-be suicide bombers from walking across the road and blowing themselves up. And you can see here the graph is a very, very powerful indicator that led about 2.5 years later, 2005, to the end of what was called the Second Intifada. During all this time, there's not a single suicide attack coming out of the Gaza Strip. Anybody want to guess why? Because the Gaza Strip is already surrounded by a fence. The Gaza Strip had already a built fence before 2000. Until this point in time, there's no barrier, no fence, no checkpoints around the West Bank. But Gaza Strip did have that barrier, and so there are no attacks, suicide attacks, coming out of Gaza. What did Gaza send to support the cause? Rockets. But that brings me to our story today. Israel understands that we have a problem. We have a population that we control that doesn't want us there. And it is not sustainable. The attempts to a negotiated solution had failed. The Palestinian leadership had rejected every offer that's ever been put on the table. That's true from 1947, it's true from 1967, and it's true also in 2000. So in 2005, at the time, Prime Minister Ariel Sharon decides to unilaterally pull out of the Gaza Strip. We remove all the Israeli settlements from the Gaza Strip. 22 settlements, 10,000 people. An additional 10,000 troops. We pulled out all the civilians, the military, the living, and the dead. We even took out the cemeteries and reburied the dead inside Israel. And we redeployed on the Green Line. This is the internationally recognized border with Israel. It's recognized since 1948. These are the internationally recognized borders of Israel. This area over here, according to the international community, is not occupied territory. It is sovereign state of Israel since 1948. And in 2005, Israel redeploys along this line. Okay? And Gaza Strip, as you can see, surrounded on two sides by Israel, an outlet to the sea, and the Egyptian border on this side. So since 2005, Israel has pulled out and no longer controls the Gaza Strip. We left the entire industrial and agricultural infrastructure intact. The Palestinians had the talent, the manpower, the ability to take this entire industry and start exporting cherry tomatoes, flowers, and strawberries to the whole world. Instead, they destroyed that entire infrastructure in 4 days. A year later, they held elections. Palestinian Authority held elections supervised by your former president, Jimmy Carter. The results shocked Mr. Carter because 75% of the vote went to Hamas back in 2006. Since then, they have not held elections for that reason. Mahmoud Abbas, the head of the Palestinian Authority, is now in his 19th year of a 4-year term. But the reason they have not held elections is exactly because of this little statistic. And in 2007, Hamas overthrew the Palestinian Authority, the PLO representatives in the Gaza Strip. When I say overthrew, it's just not just a regular military coup. They actually literally threw them off the roof and took over the Gaza Strip. It looked like this. Now, at the beginning, we have, it looks like a band of armed gangs running around Gaza, but after 2 years, we already have this. Hamas is now in charge of the Gaza Strip. 2 years after Israel pulled out, remember? And because Hamas is an organization which with Israel does not have any relationship, conversation, or a prospect of negotiation, Israel sealed the borders on the Israeli side of the Gaza Strip. Who are Hamas? Hamas are the Palestinian branch of the Islamic Brotherhood. Islamic Brotherhood is a global organization started in Egypt at the beginning of the 20th century with this purpose of exporting Sharia law in the Middle East and globally. The Islamic Brotherhood are organizations that today in Egypt are actually illegal. Even the Jordanians are cracking down on Hamas and Islamic Brotherhood. Israel will exist and will continue to exist until Islam obliterates it and as it had obliterated its predecessors. This is in the Hamas Charter from 1988. This is a Yale University translation. You can find it online. It's called the Avalon Project. The Prophet, prayer and peace be upon him, had said, quote from the Quran, "The time will not come until Muslims will fight the Jews, until the Jews hide behind rocks and trees, which will cry, 'O Muslim, there is a Jew hiding behind me. Come on and kill him.'" This is in their charter. And it goes on and on and on. If you read the charter, and I encourage you to go and read it because you need to know what we are facing, it has some even copies, entire passages from Mein Kampf and Nazi ideology, telling the story of the diabolical Jew who wants to take over the world, controls the media and the banks, with the Freemasons and other secret organizations. All of them are to be destroyed. This is Hamas. So on the local level, and I'm going to skip ahead a little bit again. On the local level, this is not something that was foreign to Israelis. We knew who Hamas was, but we had a very misguided conception. Like many in the West, we didn't take it too seriously. We thought it might be, just rhetoric. At the end of the day, Hamas was an organization that was believed can be tamed with suitcases of money, millions of dollars in cash that came in from Qatar. We believe that Hamas will be deterred, wish to gather its money and sit in piles of cash and not attack Israel and risk its own demise. We were wrong. The events of October 7th proved to Israelis that we are no longer in the discourse of post-1967. We're no longer in this world over here where we're in discussion with our Palestinian neighbor about where to draw the border. Do you remember the two-state solution? People talk about it all the time. That's the formula on the table. It has been since 2000, since Camp David. It was offered in 2008. It was offered in 2011. Two states living peacefully side by side. Israel within the borders of 1948 and Palestine within the borders of 1967. The question is where to draw the border. Israelis woke up on October 7th to realize that we're actually here. We're actually now not fighting about where the border will be, but whether or not there will even be a border. We're fighting a battle not about where will Israel be between the River Jordan and the Mediterranean Sea. We're fighting about the question whether there will even be a Israel anywhere between the river and the sea. And based on the screaming and the shouting and the demonstrations that we hear today on college campuses around the United States and around the world, it seems that most Hamas supporters don't want there to be an Israel anywhere here between the Jordan River and the sea. And so, in one morning, we lost 55 years and we went back to the 1948 paradigm. A war of existential existence. Not a war about where the border is going to be. The second truth that has emerged after October 7th, and again, from an Israeli perspective, is that it's not clear at all that we can continue to make a distinction between Hamas, the Palestinian Authority, and general Palestinian population. The idea that there is a small group of terrorists, Hamas, who are carrying out atrocities that are completely separate from a general population of peace-loving people who only want to be free is an idea that we persuaded ourselves must be true, because the alternative is unthinkable. And then we woke up on October 7th finding out there's not a single Arab leader that will stand up against Hamas. And that thousands of people in the street are in jubilation and handing out sweets and spitting on corpses and participating in the loot and the murder and the rape of Israeli civilians. And so I don't want to, please don't quote me, and I don't mean to say that there's no peace partner on the other side. I'm sure there is. But that requires more evidence. That requires more proof. Because what we experienced on October 7th taught us otherwise. And so these are watershed moments This is a watershed moment that all our assumptions, all our beliefs, the paradigm that was the path that guided us through our lives in the Middle East are now no longer relevant. And we must create entire new paradigms and entire new assumptions moving forward. This is true also on the regional level. This is not just a battle between Israel and Hamas. Hamas is an Iranian-backed militia. Hamas is a Palestinian entity, make no mistake. 40,000 fighting troops. It's 40,000 fighting troops that did not come from outer space. It's not a tribe of Martians that one day showed up in Gaza to take over the Strip and start firing rockets at Israel. They went to school in the Gaza Strip. Many of them UN schools. They went to mosques in the Gaza Strip. In the Gaza Strip, 3 and 4 and 5-year-old children were taught in school and in kindergarten about martyrdom, about paving the way to Jerusalem with their blood, about how Jews are vile and disgusting creatures, descendants of pigs and apes that must be killed. Textbooks, acculturation, religious leadership, social constructs. All these create this ideology which we call Hamas. It doesn't happen in a vacuum. It doesn't come from outer space. It is also fed and funded by Iran. Iran's strategy is to encircle Israel by its proxy forces. It has a classic MO. It will find countries where the regime is unstable or weak, with a strong, or not necessarily strong, but a Shiite minority that can be manipulated. They started in Lebanon, creating Hezbollah, that slowly became the strongest militia within an already very fractured society, to build a military force to the north of Israel. Continued with Hamas to build a military force to the south of Israel. They will do the same thing in Iraq. After the American pullout, the destabilization of Iraq, the Iranians move in to create its own Shiite militia within Iraq and appoint its own prime minister. It will do the same in Syria, with Shiite militias and Hezbollah forces moving into Syria to fight in the civil war after the Americans and the Allied forces took care of ISIS. Creating a military base here in the northern part of Israel. And they're doing the same in Yemen. The Houthis are Iranian proxy. Their flag is Allah is great, death to America, death to the Jews, death to Israel. That's their flag. These are the Houthis. They've been firing ballistic missiles and drones at Israel from Yemen. See how far they have to get there in order to hit Israel there in Sinai. So this is the Iran. You can see how Iran kind of circles Israel to be a deterrent against Israel in case Israel one day decides to attack its nuclear program. Israel needs to know that if they choose to do that, the Iranians have a sphinster hold around Israel and they can rain down rockets. So the Iranians now activated their southern proxy. It remains to be seen if they'll activate the other ones, the southern, Hamas and the Houthis. They're trying to heat up the northern border, so far without success. And thanks to a very strong, powerful, decisive American presence in the area, so far they are kept at bay. But make no mistake, Israel is not the main course. It's just the appetizer. The Iranian state continued to state loud and clear, without any shame, Israel is a small devil, America is the big devil. We are the appetizer, you're the main course. And they intend to export the revolution. Don't believe me, listen to them. One of the truths that we now have to face after October 7th is to take them at their word. They say what they mean and they mean what they say. Let's not try to explain away in English what they say because it doesn't make us feel comfortable. When they say they want to kill you, believe them. We do. And so the regional impact is once again a line that has been drawn between the radical elements and the moderate regimes of the Middle East. Israel has peace agreements with Egypt and Jordan, and most recently the Abraham Accords, which is founded on the basis of the Abrahamic faiths, giving Israel for the first time, which is why these accords are so important and so meaningful and such a game changer. For the first time, recognizing Israel's presence in the Middle East as part of the Abrahamic faith, not as a usurper, not as a colonial construct, not as a crusaders, but as indigenous to the Middle East as all the other people who are there as well. We have signed the Abraham Accords with the UAE, with Bahrain. UAE is over here. Bahrain, Sudan, Morocco, and Saudi Arabia is just around the corner. Well, it was very, very close to be signed, which is one of the reasons the Iranians chose now to carry out this attack, to try to prevent the Abraham Accords from happening. That balance of power in the Middle East, or the signing of the accords between Israel and Saudi Arabia, would have turned the tide against Iran, and they didn't want that to happen. So it's a watershed moment, and everything you read or you hear about has to also include, or when you now start to interpret it and analyze it, remember this as well. I want to go further. The line that has been drawn on October 7th is not only personal, local, regional, but it's also global. What Israel is to Iran, Ukraine is to Russia, and Taiwan is to China. The lines have been drawn between the free Western world that's based in Judeo-Christian values and the moderate Arab regimes who seek a better future for their children and the world of tyranny. The world that doesn't care for the lives of children. You think I'm exaggerating? Maybe you do. But it's time to choose. On what side do you stand in this coming global conflict? Where we're used to think, well, those of us who are my age, grew up in the 70s and 80s, saw the end of the Cold War. The end of history, Francis Fukuyama wrote in the early 90s, liberal democracies won the Cold War, right? We're in a post-war era. Globalization. Jeans and iPhones to everyone. We're now moved into a pre-war period. The lines are being drawn. On what side are you? Doesn't end there. I want to apologize now that I have to bring up these words. I'm not going to bring up the images. I've seen the images. I wish I hadn't. What happened on October 7th was not just the killing of 1,400 souls, most of them civilian, and the murder of soldiers. The rules of war mean that when a soldier ceases to be a threat, or when they're in their bed not carrying a gun, you take them hostage, you don't kill them. But they were all murdered. Many of the women were raped. mutilations, burning alive of entire families, torture of children in front of their parents and parents in front of their children. In one of the terrorist strongholds earlier this week, they found Hitler's book, Mein Kampf. It wasn't just the book itself, it was dog-eared, had comments in the margins, highlights, seemed to have been passed around quite a lot and read. What happened on October 7th is that Israelis, Jews around the world woke up to the largest massacre of Jews since the Holocaust. But it was worse than the Holocaust. It was worse than the Holocaust because the Nazis, when they sent in the Einsatzgruppen to follow in the wake of the advancing German army to round up Jews in their villages and shoot them in the forest, those Nazis, those German troops, knew what they were doing was wrong. At night, they would get drunk so they could sleep, to get the screaming out of their heads. Hamas wore GoPros and body cams, and they videotaped their actions, and they uploaded it to social media. And they shouted with joy with every Jew that they murdered. There's one recording that was captured of a Hamas terrorist who's calling his parents with glee, joy. Abba, get Ima on the phone, open the WhatsApp. I've just killed 10 Jews. Their blood is on my hands. Your son is a hero. Bless you, my son. I wish I was there with you. I can't convey to you now the joy and the glee and the jubilation and the voice of this Hamas terrorist as he's calling his parents to brag. It's not the first atrocity in warfare. There have been many others. I doubt there have been any other that the perpetrators call home to their parents to brag about what they've done. When they were done with the killing and the raping and the torture and the maiming and the burning, they kidnapped children and women and men and entire families and the elderly. I took them back to Gaza. It is the most documented atrocity in modern times. I'm not going to show you the pictures. And I urge you not to look at them if you care about your mental health. But when I hear that there are already people who are denying that this happened, then we don't have a choice but to look at evil in the eye. Don't look away. Jews woke up on October 7th. By the end of that day, before Israel had even began its counteroffensive, there were still terrorists inside Israeli farming communities and cities, shooting people, holding people hostage, and the Israeli forces were still trying to release them inside Israel. When there were already demonstrations on college campuses and in the streets of Western capitals celebrating the killing of Jews and shouting for more. She's smiling. She thinks she's a good person. She does. She's actually a medical student, 5 years into her medical studies. In a year and a half, she'll have to take the Hippocratic Oath. It starts with do no harm. She thinks she's a good person. If you ever wondered what you would do, how you would have behaved on November 9th, 1938, the night after Kristallnacht, where SS troops and Nazis rampaged through the streets of Germany, murdering Jews, breaking into their stores, burning synagogues, destroying homes. If you ever wondered, what would I have done? You're doing it now. The rise of anti-Semitism around the world is shocking. Another truth that been exposed on October 7th, the veneer of civility, the veneer, I'm not anti-Jewish, I'm just anti-Israel. I'm not anti-Semitic, I'm only anti-Zionist. You can't hide behind that anymore. Nobody's going to the streets in D.C. shouting, 2 states between the river and the sea, live in peace side by side. No. They're shouting from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free. And that means to be free of Jews. My message to you today, how many of you have a Jewish friend, colleague, a neighbor, somebody you went to college with? Give them a call. Send them a text, an emoji. Tell them you have your back. You have their back. They need it. The time is come to stand up and pick a side. It's not an Israel-Hamas thing. Don't let the details of the 100-year-old conflict between Israel and the Arab world, Israel and the Palestinians, confuse your moral compass. It's not about Israel and Palestine. It's not about Israel and Hamas. It's about common human decency. It's about our shared values. It's about the world that we want to leave our children, a world where children are not being taken from their beds and being held in the dungeons of a terrorist, genocidal, maniacal organization. It's about humanity versus evil. Thank you.
Uri, with our moments that we have left, obviously you've shared all the atrocities that have happened against the Jewish people. Over here in the West, definitely in America, there's obviously a real concern that as you are doing what you need to do to try to get these people home and to deal with the horror that is Hamas, tell me how you look at or how you think about just all the difficult things that are also happening in Gaza to the Palestinian people. Like, what is the attitude of, the people that you know in Israel? How do they feel about that?
Thank you for that question, Jim. It's very, very important. There is tremendous amount of suffering going on in Gaza. And I know that when you turn on the news, many of the images that are coming in are very difficult to watch. And I don't want to minimize or to belittle even one single death that goes on today in Gaza. Israel will rebuild. Israel will rebuild the towns and the communities that were destroyed on October 7th. But the only way for Israel to rebuild those towns and villages is to make sure that what happened on October 7th can never happen again. To do that means to destroy the capabilities of Hamas to ever carry such an attack ever again. Unfortunately, Hamas has embedded itself within civilian population, underneath hospitals, inside schools. There's a 300-mile-long underground city, tunnels, 300 miles of tunnels under Gaza City. We're not talking about tunnels like Hogan's Heroes. We're talking about massive tunnels with roads and caverns and warehouses and living quarters where thousands of terrorists live, carry out their operations, weapons caches, rockets, explosives, all underneath civilian population. Israel is a country which is obliged to follow the rule of law. And Israel is also a country that cares much for civilian lives. The efforts that Israel makes to minimize the damage to non-combatants, to minimize the harm to civilian life, surpasses any standard in any Western army today. We send down leaflets. We make phone calls. We send in ground troops instead of bombarding from the air. We create corridors. We try to allow civilians to escape where Hamas themselves are trying to make civilians remain. It is a cynical, it is a diabolical scheme. For Hamas, the casualties of civilians are a win-win. They create a situation where Israel suffers a tremendous amount of blame around the world, and it also thwarts Israel's advance or its ability to carry out its strategic plans. The death in Gaza is tragic. It is horrible. It is absolutely horrid. I don't know what the real numbers are. We cannot trust the reports coming out of Hamas. We know that they exaggerate tremendously. Just 2 weeks ago, they reported an Israeli strike on a hospital that killed 500 people. In a few hours, it was found out it wasn't an Israeli strike, but a failed Islamic Jihad rocket. It wasn't 500, it was 50. It wasn't a hospital, it was a parking lot. So I don't know what is the magnitude of their exaggeration when they give their numbers. By the way, they might be downplaying. The numbers might be higher. The truth is we don't know. But we do know that Israel will do whatever it can to prevent and to minimize civilian casualties in order to get the job done, in order to root out the Hamas presence in Gaza, so both Israeli and Palestinian children will be able to live in peace.
That's the sentiment that you would, kind of your friends, your community would share that strong sentiment?
I don't know all the Israelis, but all the Israelis do I know find no joy or comfort or happiness in the death of Gazan civilians.
Some of what you describe, honestly, is hard for us to get our heads around. At least it's hard for me to get mine around. I mean, you talk in rather big terms. October 7th, you wake up and it's a whole different world, right? And so it's a little bit, I think the closest thing we can come to here, right, is 9/11. Fair? But the closest thing, and some of you are going, what's 9/11? Because you were born after that. So it's really difficult to try to piece those things together. So without just kind of regurgitating all of that, how would you try to help us understand that? Because I really do. I believe that the vast majority of people would, and I don't think you're trying to scare us. I don't think you're trying to describe. You're trying to bring like a sobering awakening, which, by the way, if any of you are paying attention, there's a lot of conversations that are happening about this, not just in Israel, but in Europe. And a lot of it has to do with a lot of the celebrations and protests that have sprung from the events of October the 7th. So how do you think you can help us understand why it is such a, according to your perspective, like such a cataclysmic event that kind of shapes the direction of how we're going to view these, not only these parties, but the East-West, or not East-West, but the Western view versus...
9/11 is a good example because 9/11 is really a watershed moment in modern American memory. It drove America into two wars. You can compare it maybe to Pearl Harbor, right? The day that we'll remembered in infamy. The difference is that Israel is very, very small. Israel is actually tiny. You saw the size, the comparative size. In terms of adjusting for numbers, in terms of 9/11, what happened on October 7th in Israel is tantamount to 15 times 9/11. 1,400 Israelis murdered is equal to more than 50,000 Americans murdered. Millions of rockets falling into American towns and villages. Tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of injured. 40,000 who are kidnapped. No, that's the wrong number. It's about 14,000 who are kidnapped. Most of them civilian. So when you compare the order of magnitude with the size of population, and you remember how you all felt on 9/11, so multiply that by 15. What Israelis are feeling, that experience what is only can be compared to an atomic bomb. I mean, what can kill 50,000 people in an urban setting in one go? And after being hit by an atomic bomb, the world is telling Israel, you're exaggerating. It's the biggest gaslighting in history. You're exaggerating. You're acting disproportionately. You're not thinking straight. And so that kind of response for Israelis is a non-starter. As the second part of your question, that's a discussion that I think we have to have. I think that very few people in America, if any, the day after 9/11, were trying to start to understand the other side. Oh, it didn't happen in a vacuum. It's a legitimate expression, Al-Qaeda. Let's negotiate with them. Let's give them more. Let's be nicer to them. Maybe that's what's going to make them less angry with us. Or maybe there will be demonstrations in the streets or in college campuses around the world shouting for more 9/11s. That's what Israelis are feeling now. We lack the language to deal properly. When I say we, I mean we in the West. We lack the language to deal properly with the concept of jihad on a radical Islamic fundamentalist level. The notion of martyrdom, the notion that life begins after death, that this expression of life, our physical livelihood, are only a tiny, small part of the grand reality. That sending the infidels, the non-believers, to their death is our gateway to eternal life. These are concepts that it's hard for us to even deal with on a language basis. But that's what we're dealing with. It's not all the Muslims. It's not all the Palestinians. No, not at all. 90% 90% of the terror attacks by radical jihadists occur in Muslim countries. They are the most affected by this kind of belief system. We're only seeing it now because it touches us now.
During COVID, I think this will be a good thing maybe to almost end on. I think Uri will be around if you would like to ask some more questions instead of trying to have an open mic. A lot of information has been given here. There is actually on the back two tables right back here, there's a number of cards in which you can not only connect with Uri, but you can connect with a work that he actually does helping people see the Holy Land, which is kind of the normal type of conversations that we usually have in a much simpler time. And so I really encourage you to grab one of those on the way out. But just for the record, tell them a little bit about what you did during COVID. So when everything got shut down and you were no longer able to lead tours, what was your job in Israel? What were you actually doing? Just because I find this to be very interesting. It really does give us a little bit of a sense of who you are.
After several months that it became clear that I'm not going to go back to tourism anytime soon, I pivoted. I went back to my old vocation in resource development and fundraising. I began working for an organization, an Arab organization in Israel, promoting the employment of Arab engineers in Israeli high-tech. So I worked in an Arab village in Kfar Qasem and in Nazareth. I used to drive to Nazareth twice a month.
So you worked for an Arab company, trying to help Arab engineers get into high-tech
in
Israel companies.
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's interesting, to say the least.
Well, there are millions, 300 million Arabs in the Middle East. 2 million of them are not demonstrating against Israel. 2 million of them have freedoms and liberties of vocation, education. They vote, they can be elected, they can travel, they can become whatever they want. Those 2 million live in Israel.
Interesting. Okay, let me conclude with a thought that I think is important for us to see. Thank you for sharing. Really, can we give him a thank you?
Thank you. Thank you very much.
I don't think that many of us in here can understand what it is like to live in a place like you do, in which just about a month ago, you didn't know exactly where it was going to end, and when you are essentially like a marked person, so to speak. Like, I don't think we can understand that. And so I can appreciate just how passionate you can get at times, and how for you, as you describe this, these aren't ideas. This is as you described it, for the nation, and even for you and for your family, it's an existential reality. So I want to thank you for that. I really do appreciate you as a friend, and thank you for coming and spending some time with us. I think it is really important that for those of you who know Christ, that you understand that what we are dealing with here is just not something that we think about politically, or we even think about nationally, but we think about them spiritually. That we recognize that there is evil in the world, and we know the author of evil. And we recognize that there is a God who is over all of these things, even when it seems like, where is he? No. We know exactly where he is. And there can be within us kind of a stirring up of ourselves when we see an injustice. And I think we've learned a lot of these lessons over the last few years, where we see an injustice and we get so worked up and we get so upset, and it either leads to frustration or anger, which I don't think is really the Christian response. And not that there isn't some kind of emotional response that is natural and normal, but I think it is important for us as followers of Jesus Christ to remember to take all of these things to him, and to remember that he is in control, which keeps us from finding moments of absolute desperation or frustration or anger. That we recognize the bigger picture of things so that we know how to pray and how to learn and how to humble ourselves, learning how to even repent, learning how to be a part of the solution when it's as simple and as real as if you know somebody who is Jewish and you haven't reached out to them, it'd be a good time for you to do it. Something as simple as that. Something as simple for you to do is to just become more aware of circumstances like this. And one of the biggest aches that I have about stuff like this is there are so many issues right now happening in the world. Are you aware? And may ignorance not be our quick default, but may we try to understand much better what is happening in the world. But may we always do it, truly, may we always do it with a sense of Christian hope, which is not blind to the ugliness of the world, but it does see it through the redemptive work of Jesus Christ. And that is what it means to be Christian, to engage in conversation, to engage in care, to engage in conversations about the truth, and then in the end, to not lose hope in a world that is going crazy. I really think the most important thing we can do right now is pray, don't you? Pray. So I want to do that right now. God, I have thought in history as I read about nights like November of 38 and just wondering what was wrong with everybody and why didn't they do something. And I would admit now in the last few years, as Uri pointed out, there have been occurrences in our world that I think sober us to realize that there are things happening all around us. May we not lose heart. May we not become cynical. May we not become avoidant. And Father, right now I pray for those hostages right now that are terrified. And I pray, Father, that you would bring about their release, that you would watch over them and their families. That, God, you would bring healing to those who have already lost loved ones. And God, truly, we pray for those that innocently are losing their lives right now because of the evil that exists in Gaza. And so, Father, I pray that you would bring a swift and right end to this conflict so that the hostages might be freed and reunited with their families and people could mourn properly and things could be rebuilt. Father, forgive us for wanting to rush through this in a way that just denies the brokenness and the evil in the world. And so I pray, Father, that there would be an increased sense of humility and Father, that we would just recognize just how broken this world is and how good you are. So God, we ask you to do the work that you can only do in bringing peace. And Father, for you to do it in the way that only you can. For vengeance is yours and you will repay. And I ask you, Father, to then bring about a swift and speedy end so that peace might exist. But we leave this in your hands. We really do. And it's in Jesus' name we humbly pray. Amen. One last thing, just so you know, we really do appreciate Uri coming, and as you know, we have had a relationship with him because of his touring with us. You may have heard that stopped again. And so one of the ways that we think that we can bless him is by, if you look in the two back, we have 2 boxes. And if you would like to just help Uri over the next few weeks and months as he waits for this conflict to end and for tourism to start up again, you can drop it off in those 2 boxes, and we will make sure that it gets to him. We thank you so much. Uri will be up here. He would love to talk with you if you would like to talk. I'm and other pastors are available if you want to continue this conversation. We would love to continue it with you as well. God bless. Go in God's peace. Go in God's strength. And we will see you Wednesday night.